Hi, this is Steve Rigolosi, and tonight on Forgotten Mysteries, I have for you One Down by Anders Bodelsen. This is copyright 1970 by Harper Row. It is one of the Harper novels of suspense. And one thing to notice about the cover here is that they credit the translator right here on the cover. It says translated from the Danish by Carolyn Bly. And I'm big time in favor of that because I think the work of the translator is really quite challenging, and they are a true partner when a book is going to be translated to a new language, right? That just think about it, having to pick up on all the nuances of the original language and translate that into a different language. It must be very challenging and rewarding. The weird thing is, right, we English speakers who do not speak Danish can't really tell if the translation is good or not, right? Because we don't know what the original was. But I suspect it was a good translation because it was easy to read and well written, and so this is just a tip of the hat to all of the wonderful translators out there, kind of maybe the unsung heroes of the literary world. I have a lot to say tonight, and this video may get a little discursive, so just bear with me or fast forward if you need to. A little bit about Anders Bodelsen was indeed a Dane, a Danishman, and had quite a good reputation in Denmark, and published a lot of books. Was sort of kind of the social realism school, and a lot of his books, from what I read, kind of center on middle class people or the bourgeoisie who kind of get challenged with something that's maybe outside their ken or maybe slightly outside their typical morality. And there's a conflict between sort of personal morality and materialism or material wealth. And that's certainly the case in this book. So I don't have a lot of details about Anders Bodelsen except for his publication history here in the States. It doesn't look like a lot of his books were translated into English, but the ones that were received very well. And this book is good too, and I'll tell you why. Before I do that, now I'll get into some of the publishing stuff later in the video because that's where I typically do it. So the first, let me talk about why I chose this book to read. So I, like so many people, am a fan of Nordic noir, and I guess we can think of Nordic noir really having gotten its boost. It's jettisoned into the stratosphere with Stig Larsson and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and that Millennium trilogy. And I have to say, that success was very well deserved. Like I literally was up till 5 o'clock in the morning finishing The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. That's how much I loved it. I think the other two were quite as good, but they were all really good books. And Stieg Larsson kind of got me into the modern Scandinavian or Nordic writers, and I've come to really like several of them, including Lars Kepler, and I think Karen Fossum is very good. I like Arnaldur Indridason from Iceland. So, there's that whole Nordic thing that's fun to read about. So I picked up this book as a way of kind of seeing what came before, right? I don't know a lot about the history of Scandinavian mysteries or thrillers. So I thought, it'd be interesting to see what was going on in that subgenre 50, 60 years ago and compare it to what is happening today. And that made for some interesting comparisons and contrasts in my own head. And it made me wonder a little bit about this thing from literary theory, which, and this is pretty accessible. Harold Bloom, the literary critic, coined a phrase called the anxiety of influence. And by that, he meant that serious writers almost constantly struggle with the weight of all of the high quality writers who have come before them. So it's like this weight sitting on their shoulders, and they're worried that they will not be able to write anything that is not derivative of or duplicative of, or duplicative, not sure on the pronunciation of that one, of earlier writers. So they really kind of have to negotiate with the writers of the past to find their own voice, and there are certain sort of techniques that they can use to do that by kind of reframing things, recasting things, or whatever. But it's a very interesting idea that writers, if they're trying to be unique or trying to make their own contribution, they have to deal with the past. And so I wondered if today's modern Scandinavian writers looked to people like Anders Bodelsen and said, he was one of the early ones, and what can we do to improve upon him, or to use the groundwork that he and others laid down for us. And so the way I see this book as possibly influencing contemporary Nordic noir is it's deeply psychological. What it basically comes down to is warfare between two men, psychological warfare. So I'll tell you a little bit about the plot, which is simple. So and I'm going to say these names in English, right? Because I don't want to embarrass myself by trying to pronounce them in Scandinavian, in Danish. Scandinavian is not a language, Steve, and making a complete fool of myself. So our lead character, you can't even really call him a hero because he's not particularly heroic, is Winther, Henrik Winther. And he is the general manager of an auto company based in Denmark that is doing a strategic alliance with a German company to build cars in Denmark. And they're on the verge of developing and launching a brand new car that's supposed to be the new Euro car. So there's some interesting ins and outs of the car industry. There's a lot of talk about Ralph Nader's book on Safe at Any Speed. So there's some interesting historical stuff in here for auto enthusiasts. But what happens is one night, Henrik kind of, he stops at a bar for a drink, and he kind of gets involved with this bunch of much younger people who they're just inviting everybody to go out to somebody's, second home for a party to smoke hashish. And he finds himself along with them and really filling the generation gap. And, he gets there, and he feels like all these kids really dislike him because they consider him so bourgeois and so materialistic. And so he kind of just wants to get out of there. So he borrows somebody's car to go back to the train station that will take him back to Copenhagen. And it's pitch dark and it's snowing, and an elderly man, just wearing ear flaps so that he can't hear anything, rides his bicycle directly in front of this car that Winther is driving. And Winther hits him. The guy goes flying head over heels. And so he's dead. He has killed this man. Now, what makes it tricky is that the brakes on the car did not work. So Winther did everything in his power to steer out of the way, to avoid having the accident. And if the brakes had been working, he would have been able to avoid having the accident. So it was really the car's fault that this happened. And yet, Winther can't seem to hold on to that fact, and immediately begins thinking of how he is going to cover it up, how he's going to move the body, he's going to take the guy's bicycle and throw it over a cliff, because he doesn't want anything to do with this man's death. And he doesn't particularly feel a lot of remorse either. He thinks, well, he's old and his time was coming up, and it kind of serves him right for wearing those ear flaps and bicycling after dark in a snowstorm. So the protagonist from the beginning, you're not really there with him, because if he had just gone to the authorities, it totally would have been considered involuntary manslaughter, right? Because he tried, and later on the car is found and it is determined to have a brake system that does not work. So you really have to wonder why Winther would make the decisions that he made to try to cover everything up, and then live in fear that he's going to be found out. And what it really comes down to is he likes his job, he likes his salary, he is in the process of designing and building a nice house. I mean, Scandinavian design is so beautiful, but kind of, I guess, what we would think of today as a McMansion, but in Denmark. And I guess he just doesn't want anything to interfere with that. And it blinds him, and it makes him less sympathetic. And of course, because this is a mystery suspense thriller, that someone is going to find out, and someone from the party certainly does. A young man named Hastrup, who is clearly mentally unbalanced and begins to insinuate himself into Winther's life. There's the constant threat of blackmail. There's emotional blackmail. He's always holding this over Winther's head. And even then, Winther doesn't think, I should just come clean. I should go to the authorities and let them know what happened. But Hastrup kind of forces Winther to get him a job at his company, and then he worms himself into Winther's household. And it's all very, very creepy and very psychological, where Hastrup is playing psychological games with him. Winther doesn't know what to do, is trying to stay one step ahead of him, isn't really psychologically astute enough or smart enough to be able to fight back in any sort of effective way. And that is really what leads to the pleasure of the reading experience here, is this psychological warfare. It's all going on kind of underneath the surface, and you're wondering, something's got to explode. Something has to happen. And someone has to win, right? In a contest of two, somebody has to win. And who will it be? And that is the suspense that drives the book forward. So while I found maybe the first, 25% of it to be a little slow, I found the psychological suspense of it kind of riveting throughout the rest of the book, even as I was feeling frustrated with Winther and just wondering why he would not come clean, even though I really knew why. And I guess the moral here is that when you place your material wealth over your basic morality, you're gonna hit some issues that are not easily solved. So very readable, fast, suspenseful, and a really nice introduction to earlier Nordic noir. Bodelsen had also published an English translation of an earlier book called Think of a Number. And that one was published here with great fanfare, got great reviews. So did this one. So I suggest, giving it a try. If you're looking for action, on the ski slopes or on the Autobahn, or, jet setting from European capital, you're not going to get that here. But you are going to get a really good psychological battle with an ending that makes you go, you close the book thinking, it gives you something to think about. So I really liked it. And I just want to make a couple other small points. The first is, I talk about the Harper novels of suspense a lot on this channel. And I don't know if I've ever showed you that the Harper novels of suspense had end papers that say Harper Novel of Suspense. You can see it there. And that was really a branding device for these books. And I love that because it showed real ownership and pride in an imprint, and that, of course, is Joan Kahn. She really did go far beyond in terms of her imprint, and would, I think, write her own back cover copy and make little cross sticks with the word Harper or suspense, and came up with these little jingles like "Your pleasures are immense with Harper novels of suspense." So really, excuse me, a true editor, truly devoted to her list. If you like tales of psychological suspense, one quasi-disturbed person squaring off after another one, I also want to recommend this book here. It's Death of an Intruder by Nedra Tyer. She's not talked about or read a lot lately, but this book is really, really terrific. I love it. It's about a woman who invades another woman's home, and it becomes a battle for that house. And I think if you read this book, you will never forget it. It's really, really good. Third thing I wanted to mention is, even though I don't usually talk about modern books here, as I mentioned, Bodelsen's first book published in English was called Think of a Number. And that reminded me of another book I read not too long ago. This one here, Think of a Number by John Verdon. And I just, I show it to you here because I liked it. I thought he did some really interesting things. I thought it was really very clever. And so I just want to give a little bit of a plug to this book, which I thought was quite good. And the last thing I want to talk about is go back to the anxiety of influence. And thinking about that gave me some insight into why I don't find a lot of modern mysteries to be particularly grabby to me, because I feel like a lot of the modern writers don't struggle so much with the anxiety of influence, that they don't look to Agatha Christie, Margaret Miller, the greats, to say, how can I stand on their shoulders and go one better? A lot of them just seem content to write books that don't really seem to have a lot of ambition. Now, I realize that I am tarring a lot of people with one brush, and I don't mean to do that. But I think that's one of the reasons why I like older books better. I feel like the authors were struggling with the anxiety of influence more, which led to better books. But like, one person that I think we can say struggled with the anxiety of influence and came out on top was Gillian Flynn. So even though, book commentators are fond of talking about the 12 billion copies of Gone Girl that she sold, you see in that book that she had in mind the great surprises of previous writers, particularly, to my mind, Ira Levin and A Kiss Before Dying. And the big turnabout in those books appears at about the same part in the book or whatever. But she did a really modern twist on it and made it really psychological, and had the bravery to put forth an ending that a lot of people did not like, but which I thought was perfect. She really, that book was successful for a reason. In addition to telling a good story, I kind of feel like people said, this book is something special for a reason. And I think that has to do with her having dealt with the anxiety of influence. Although I read her earlier, more straightforward mysteries, and I really thought those were terrific books too, because she's such a good writer. So I guess it was a reminder to me of the value of literary criticism, whether you're reading literature or whether you're reading just sort of genre fiction. And you can click off now, because I'm just going to kind of pontificate about literary criticism for a while. When I was in grad school, I really got a bug up my rear end about literary criticism, because I felt that my grad school rammed it down everybody's throat to the exclusion of literature, to the point where criticism was an end or a methodology in itself rather than a way of really explaining and developing a deeper appreciation for literature and books. And so I was kind of snotty about it back then, because I was like, can we talk about the text? Can we talk about Dickens? Can we talk about, Henry Fielding? Can we talk about Samuel Johnson instead of like all of these, hip names in literary criticism? So since those days, I've really become more aware. These schools of thought have filtered through my head, and a lot of them really are very, very valid, depending on the book you're reading, right? Like structuralism, which is all about how laden with meaning even the simplest language is, can really give you an amazingly intense view into a book. And of course, feminist criticism. I was lucky enough as an undergrad to have wonderful feminist professors, and I feel like once you learn more about feminist issues, you can't read a book and not see them. So I feel like that's a gift that they gave me. And so I really realized that what I learned in grad school, even though I was spitting tacks back in those days, I've taken forward into my reading life. And so I guess I have to do a belated appreciation for my grad training, because it's much more useful to me now than it is then. I will say that I think deconstructionism and Jacques Derrida are just a load of horse pucky. I mean, what pretentious nonsense. If you ever want to read something completely impenetrable and impressed with itself and useless, okay, I'm just gonna call it like it is, useless, try reading Derrida. He's a major polarizing figure. I got your number, Derrida, and even though you're a world famous literary critic and I'm just this little editor with a vlog on YouTube, I think you really pulled the wool over half the world's eyes. But I will tell you a funny story about him. So when I was in grad school, he was an invited guest, and he was, coming to give a presentation, and the whole campus was a Twitter. This leading light of literary criticism was going to speak to us and sprinkle his magic pixie dust on us and make us all into world famous literary critics. So I went to grad school with this very unique woman. I won't mention her name, but she wore the same clothes every day. She wore black from head to toe, and then she had bleached blonde hair. So when you saw her at night, all you saw was kind of a glowing head coming towards you. It was like she was a disembodied head, because the rest of her would fade into the blackness because of her clothing. And she was very much one of these people to spout literary theory and, make sure her professors overheard her expressing appreciation for, Roland Barthes or, any of the other big names, Paul de Man, other the big names from those days. And she waited in line so that she could be the first person into the hall for Derrida. And she got a place on the floor where she sat looking up at him throughout his entire speech with a look of utter, almost like religious adoration. It was like she had been transported into heaven and had, become, a higher entity just by her proximity to Jacques Derrida. And he spoke. I didn't understand a frigging word he said. And I'm thinking, this is bullshit. Get me out of here. But, I had to play the game. But what happens is at the end of his at the end of his talk, this woman goes up to him, and clearly she had questions prepared to ask him. And in the course of talking to him, she took his fountain pen off of the podium. And he said, "Well, will you please return my fountain pen?" And she said, "No, I will not. I must have something that you own." He said, "But that pen is important to me. It was given to me by my grandmother or by someone important in my life or whatever. It's like, I really want it back." And she said, no. She refused to give him back his pen. She stole Jacques Derrida's pen and basically ran out of the lecture hall with her stolen goods. And I always thought, wow, I'll never forget that. And I've had so few occasions to ever tell that story to anybody, which I think is so damn kooky. I thought, I've got to just get it out there into the YouTube verse just to show you how wackadoo grad school studies can be. It's just burned in my mind because it was so beyond the pale. Okay, but that's it for tonight. Thank you for listening. If you've watched this far, if you ever want to not have fun reading, read something by Derrida. If you want to have some fun reading a psychological thriller, try One Down by Andres Bodelsen. And thank you. I'll be back next time. Good night.